as we look at a tale of two kings, the story of Saul and David. Reading through the Old Testament, I came once again to 1 Samuel, and just reading through it, that's where I often get my best thoughts. To just sermons that just surface and just seem to connect with their thoughts. And just a word of background here, Samuel is now old, and there's no one to take his place. And so the people have asked for a king so that they would be like all other nations. Up to this point, it is God who has been their king. That's why that it was called the kingdom of God in the Old Testament. But they don't want to be the kingdom of God. They want to be the kingdom of Israel. And they want to have a king like others. So they come to Samuel and they say to him, give us a king. Let's pick it up in 1 Samuel 8 and verse 7. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in what they say to you, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from being a king over them. But he says to Samuel, he goes on, he says, now they're wanting a king like everybody else. Don't take it personal, Samuel. What they're really rejecting is me as their king. But you need to tell them what kind of king they'll end up with. So 1 Samuel 8 also, verse 14 through 18, he says, this king is going to take the best of your fields and vineyards and orchards and give them to his servants. He's going to take a tenth of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers. He's going to take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and their donkeys and put them in his work. He'll take a tenth of your flocks, and you will be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourself. And the Lord will not answer you. Ouch. You're going to get a king. This is what you want. But you're not going to like him. You know, there is no king like Jesus. And when we substitute for him, we're not going to like it in the end. We should let God choose. We should let his word guide us. And we should let our Samuels be our counselors. Well, they said, thank you for that good advice, Samuel, but we're going to have a king anyway. So God said, all right, let's give him a king. So in chapter 9 of 1 Samuel, God sends him a king from the family of Kish. And it says several things about him in 1 Samuel 9, verse 1 and 2. It says, verse 1 of Samuel 9, that he was a man of wealth. His family was come from a long line of rich people. Well, that's good, right? You always want to marry a rich man. Get one with a Corvette. That's bound to make you happy. Then in verse 2, it says that the son of Kish was Saul. He was a handsome young man. So we know he's young, and that's got to be good, full of energy. And verse 2 of 1 Samuel 9 also says that he was a handsome man, handsome young man. And I just noticed this week. In 1 Samuel 9:2, there was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he was. Now, how about that? He was the most handsome man in Israel. Young, rich, beautiful. There's a keeper. And then it says also in verse 2 that from his shoulders and up he was taller than any of the people. Boy. Well, you know he's going to be a winner. Rich, young, more handsome than anybody in Israel, very tall. A movie came out in 1941. You may have seen it. This front row, I'm sure they were there at that movie. 1941. It was called Tall, Dark, and Handsome. And it starred Cesar Romero. And no, I wasn't there when they produced the movie. But did anybody ever see that? It's been replayed, I think, on TV. Tall, Dark, and Handsome. Cesar Romero was 6'3", from a wealthy Cuban family. The airport in Cuba is named after his family. And in 1968, he was named the most beautiful man in the world by TV Guide. There was only one problem. He was a homosexual. One of his boyfriends, some of you will remember this, was Desi Arnaz, the husband of I Love Lucy fame. I was like, really? Man. One person wrote, Cesar Romero went out more with Desi Arnaz than Lucy did. The most beautiful man in the world. But he wouldn't have been a catch. Saul was probably much like that. But Saul, and as you go through Samuel, you'll start seeing this. Saul was never humble before God. 1 Samuel 13:8 says that he went to fight a battle with the Philistines, and he was waiting. Samuel the prophet had said, now you wait till I get there. We're going to have a prayer. We're going to ask God to be with you as you go into battle, and I will offer the sacrifice as the priest, because only the priest could do that. So Saul said, okay. Well, as they waited on Samuel, his army began to disperse. They got tired of waiting. So he was down from thousands to a few hundred. So Saul gets impatient and he offers the sacrifice. Puts himself in the place of the priest. And then Samuel shows up. What have you done? He said, well, I had to go ahead and offer it because we were losing all the soldiers. And Samuel says to him, 1 Samuel 13:13, he says, Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord, which he gave to you, and now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought a man after his own heart. What does that mean? He sought a man after his own heart, talking about David. He says, to seek God's heart means you want to know, you want to feel what God feels. You want to bear the burden that God has. Not just how God sees things or what God wants you to do, but you want to feel it. How does God feel about that? What grieves Him? What makes Him happy? Because I want to carry in my emotional condition the same feelings that the God of heaven has. What burdens Him? I want to carry that. And Samuel says, God has sought someone like that. So God sends Samuel to anoint young David as king. This is in 1 Samuel 16. Samuel goes to Jesse, David's father. And he says, I want you to go over here to Jesse's family. And it says, 1 Samuel 16:6, when they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, this must be the Lord's anointed. Here's Eliab is the older brother. He's tall, handsome. We already been there, done that. And God said, I don't want Eliab, the older brother. So the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or how tall he is. I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance. The Lord looks on the heart. Amen. That's what God's after. You don't have to be tall, dark, and handsome to be a man after God's own heart. So he said to Jesse, the next brother passed by. Samuel says, that's not him. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass in front of Samuel, and none of them registered with Samuel. And Samuel said, the Lord hasn't chosen any of these. Are all your sons here? I know God sent me down here. Are all your sons here? And Jesse said, well, there's the youngest one. He's out keeping sheep. And Samuel said, bring him in. So he does. And when Samuel saw David, it says 1 Samuel 16:11, he said, he anointed him with oil in the name of the Lord, pronounced him to be the anointed of God, and it says the Spirit came upon him from that day. It's in the next chapter, chapter 17, that David hears Goliath defying Israel, and it stirs his heart, and he says, I'll go fight Goliath, and he kills the giant. So what I started seeing, going through Samuel, I just started seeing these contrasts between Saul and David. A man who was king, he had position and title and everything going for him. But then there's David, the coming king. And I just jotted down some contrasts between these two, and I want to share them with you real quick. Here's one. Saul thought highly of himself. In 1 Samuel 15:11, God told Saul to bring judgment on the Amalekites. They were a wicked city. And God said, Saul, I want you to go down and I want you to wipe out the Amalekites. So he goes down, but he doesn't wipe them out. He captures them, keeps the sheep, keeps the donkeys for himself and the people, and saves the Agag, the Amalekite king. And Samuel comes on the scene and says, why haven't you obeyed the Lord? He said, well, I pretty much did. And Samuel is standing there, and he looks over and he says, what's that? And it's a statue of Saul. 1 Samuel 15, verse 12 says, Saul had set up a monument to himself. Now, if somebody else wants to make a statue of you, that may be one thing, but when you have to make your own statue, it's not a good sign. Saul thought highly of himself. He exalted himself. But how did David view himself? Well, Saul began to pursue David, and so David in 1 Samuel 18, here's an example of what David thought of himself. David said to Saul, 1 Samuel 24:14, he says, "Why are you chasing me? Who am I?" He says, "After whom do you pursue?" 1 Samuel 24:14. "I'm a dead dog." I mean, those weren't the kind of little puppies you have in your homes. These are wild dogs. He says, "I'm like a dead dog. I'm not even a live dog. I'm a dead dog." Then he adds, "No, I'm worse. I'm a flea on a dead dog." That's what you call inferiority complex. But look at the contrast between Saul, who says, "Who am I? Let us build a monument to me." And David, who says, "Who am I? I'm a flea on a dead dog." I just thought that was an interesting contrast. By the way, when you're very insignificant, very weak and influential in yourself, you tend to need the Lord. Here's a second thing, is what influenced each man the most? What kind of peer group did they have? 1 Samuel 24. Let me, if you have your Bible there, I don't know if we can get all this on the screen, but 1 Samuel 24. I'll be delicate here, but I must tell you ahead of time that Saul is pursuing David, 1 Samuel 24 and verse 3. Saul is chasing David, and he's going to kill him because he's jealous. They were singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. So Saul's very jealous, and he's trying to kill David. And he's pursuing David, and David is hiding in a cave, and, well, Saul has to go to the bathroom. So, you're out in the wilderness chasing an enemy. You need some privacy. So Saul goes in this cave to relieve himself. This is in 1 Samuel 24, verse 3. "And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. And David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave." They were hiding from Saul. Saul comes in, squats down. Hey, did we get a... Oh, okay. Okay. All right, there's Saul. And David comes up and cuts off the robe, the corner of his robe, while Saul is distracted. And then David feels guilty about that. And while he's there, verse 4, "The men of David said to him, 'Here's the day of which the Lord said, I'm going to give your enemy into your hand, and you can do to him as seems good.' But it says, verse 6, 'He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this to my king, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, since he's still the king.'" His men said, "Here's your chance. He's indisposed, he's vulnerable. Cut his throat." And David said, "No, I'll wait on God to remove him." Just because you can hurt your enemy doesn't mean you should. It could be a test. And it could be a dividing line between who he is and who you are. So David does what is merciful and what is right. And then when Saul leaves, David comes out of the cave, goes around and stands on a nearby hill. And here's what he talks loudly to Saul. 1 Samuel 24, verse 9. And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men, that David seeks your harm? Your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand, and some told me to kill you, but I spared you. Here's the thing. Look at how David says, why are you listening to the words of men that I am trying to harm you? Who was Saul listening to? The words of men. But when David heard the words of his peers, he said no. David stood for the things that were right when the majority around him were saying, do that which everybody else does. And so, what is it that controls us? What shapes our behavior? Often our conduct is formed by peer groups. Our values, our food choices, clothing styles, and those we surround ourselves with will often tell us to take a path that is contrary to the will and the mind of God and the heart of God, when we need to stand with God and for God in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. It'll make a king out of you. Here's a third contrast. Saul felt sorry for himself. He'd throw a pity party. Look at 1 Samuel 22, verse 6. Saul has been chasing David and he can't seem to find him, and nobody will help him. And 1 Samuel 22, verse 6, Saul heard that David was discovered and the men with him, and he was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand and all his servants standing about him. And he said to his servants who stood around, hear now, you people of Benjamin. Now he's from Benjamin, so these are all his relatives. Hear now, you people of Benjamin, 1 Samuel 22, verse 7. Will the son of Jesse give you fields and vineyards and make you commanders of thousands and hundreds like I have? That all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses when my son makes a covenant with him. None of you is sorry for me. None of you feel sorry for me. You can almost hear the whine in his voice. He's throwing a pity party and inviting family and friends to attend it. Saul feels sorry for himself. And somebody said, well, there's a priest, the priestly city down here, they were helping David, giving him food and stuff. So Saul goes down and wipes them all out. You know, self-pity is counterproductive and will lead to hostility toward others. But what about David? Did David get frustrated? Did David have defeats? Well, if you turn to 1 Samuel chapter 30, 1 Samuel chapter 30, you'll find that David and his men are in a city called Ziklag. And they have their wives and their children and their property all in this walled village. While David and his men are away, the Amalekites come in. And it says, verse 2, 1 Samuel 30, verse 2, then they had taken captive the women and all in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them all off and went their way. In verse 3, when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters all taken captive. Now there's a downer. 1 Samuel 30, verse 4, then David and the people with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. And in verse 6, it even says David was greatly distressed, and the people spoke of stoning him because they were all bitter in soul for their sons and daughters. So they lost everything. It's like you come home and there's been a fire, burn the house down, everybody in it, and there's nothing left. And they were bitter, all these men were bitter toward David. But look at what the last phrase of 1 Samuel 30, verse 6. David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Now that's the opposite of feeling sorry for yourself. Do God's people ever have Ziklag experiences? Yeah. Well, it seems like we've lost everything. It seems like this is a rough day. What's the difference in Saul and David? Saul feels sorry for himself. Saul throws a pity party. Saul lashes out at others. David, and the King James Version says, he encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Man, I mean, that's a sermon in itself. 3 points. 1, encourage yourself or strengthen yourself. I underlined the word yourself. David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. He didn't wait on somebody else to do it. And who's going to do it? All his men who are with him, they lost their sons and daughters and wives too. They lost everything. They're ready to stone him. They're not going to encourage him. Sometimes people who are around you are not going to encourage you because they got worse problems than you got. So that if somebody doesn't get encouraged in God, there's not going to be any courage whatsoever. He encouraged himself. He did not depend on other people to encourage him. He said, I'll take responsibility for my own level of spiritual life. But the second thing is he encouraged himself. How? In the Lord. In the Lord. He didn't take an extended vacation. He didn't go off into some isolated, self-indulgent weekend. He encouraged himself in the Lord by looking to the Lord. And then third, verse 19 says that they went after the Amalekites, captured them, and nothing was missing. David rescued his wives, nothing was missing, small or great. Verse 19 says, sons and daughters, spoil or anything had been taken, David brought it all back. Here's what I want to say to you. Encourage yourself in the Lord and expect to get everything back that you lost. Get it all back. Go after it. Don't feel sorry for yourself, but encourage yourself in the Lord and expect a full return on your losses. And by the way, this is 1 Samuel 30. Saul is still the king. David's been pursued by Saul. He's tired. Now he's lost his wives and children and property. And it's like, wow, at this point, why don't you just give up? Within 3 days of this event, most chronologists would tell us, David got his wives back, children back, property back, and Saul was dead by the hands of the Philistines, and David was anointed king in Judah 3 days later. Wow. That's full recovery. One final contrast that I notice is that Saul cared little about worship. David longed for it. Saul, so far as I know, built one altar, and that was in the beginning of his reign. He reigned 40 years, and I didn't see any evidence that he ever built another one. He ended up at the end going up to a witch for guidance. That's a bad sign when you got to go to a witch to get some kind of spiritual consolation. Saul cared little for worship. In 1 Samuel 26, verse 17, let me give you this verse. 1 Samuel 26, it says, Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this you, David?" And David said, "It is." And David said, 1 Samuel 26, 18, "Why does my Lord pursue his servant? What have I done to you? What evil is in my hands? If the Lord the king hears the words of his servant, if it's the Lord who stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering." In other words, if God's mad at me and brought you against me, then may an offering be atonement and that be satisfied. He says, "But if it's just men that's done it, may they be cursed before the Lord." 1 Samuel 26, 19. And here's why. And here's what burdened David more than anything. He says, "For they have driven me out this day from the heritage of the Lord, so that I have no share in it. And they have said, 'Go and serve these other gods.'" See, David could not go to the tabernacle. He's being looked for. He's being chased. So he couldn't go to worship. He couldn't bring the sacrifices. He had to stay in the Philistine camps. He stayed with the Moabites. He stayed outside of the land of Israel. And what angered him more than anything is he says, "You have kept me from the heritage of the Lord by putting me with all these other idolatrous people. I miss worship. I miss the true God." David writes about this in the Psalms, Psalm 42, verse 2. He says, "My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Oh, when shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night when they say to me, 'Where is your God?'" And he says, Psalm 42, verse 4, "This is what I remember as I pour out my soul, how I would go with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of God." I remember those days, David said. I used to go to the worship, and I'd take people, I'd gather them all up, and I'd lead them there. And we'd go with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping festival. By the way, these are glimpses of early Jewish worship. It was fun, happy, dancing, joyous, shouting. We're a little shy of some of that. I think we need to step it up just a little. And he says, "I would lead them in procession to the house of God with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping a festival. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within? Hope in God, I will again praise Him, my salvation and my God." David says, I'll do it again. I'll be back. When I come back. And he did. Remember how he moved the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem. He was dancing half naked, and his wife saw him and said, "You're so undignified. You're the king." He said, "Oh, I'll be more undignified than this." He loved the worship. Saul, you don't see anything like that. So what does this have to do with us? Well, Revelation 1:6 says, God, through the blood of Christ, has made us kings and priests to God. What kind of king will we be? What will everybody is over something. We have a domain. If you're an employer, you're over your employees. If you're a father, you're over your household. If you're a mother, you're over your children. If you're a child, you're over the younger siblings. You're over something. Everyone has a fiefdom. What kind of reign will you have? Romans 5:17 says, "Those which receive abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness shall reign in life by Jesus Christ." May He, by His grace, by His strength, help us to be like David, not Saul. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank You for this shining example in the early life of David, and how that he loved You and trusted You, how that he could recover, and how that he could encourage himself, and how that he didn't take matters in his own hands but left things with You. God, thank You, and help us to be kings like this. Help us to reign like this. And we pray this morning Your blessing upon our offering as we worship in tithes and gifts today. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.